Justice Harod, a teenager from Florida, USA, mysteriously disappeared after school. The police had to unravel a complex case, and the deeper they delved into the details, motives, and chilling scenarios played out by the criminals, the more horrified they became by the cynicism and cold-bloodedness with which the killer committed one of the most brutal crimes in the county's history. Friday, April 13, 2018, turned out to be a truly ominous day, becoming the day of a tragedy that made law enforcement officers in the state work hard. It had been only 3 weeks since Justice Harod's 16th birthday. That day, she was going to school and then planned to spend time with friends. That morning, the girl woke up later than usual, already late for the bus that picked her up from the stop. Her 37-year-old mother, Danelle, was busy getting her 5-year-old daughter ready for kindergarten, so she couldn't help her older daughter get to the educational institution. According to Danelle, Justice went to school on foot. In the evening, she was supposed to return from school by bus, as always. At the appointed time, the girl did not appear at home. At first, her family was not worried, because Justice had a lot of friends, and she often stayed with one of them after classes. But time passed, and she still wasn't there. At home, they also weren't too concerned, knowing that their daughter could stay overnight at her best friend's house. The parents had to get up early for work, so they went to bed without waiting for her. But even the next morning, the girl's bed was empty, and her mother, losing patience, felt anxiety and concern for her child. Danelle couldn't get through to her daughter, so she turned to the police. Law enforcement officers accepted the missing person report and got to work. Detectives began working on versions regarding Justice's whereabouts. They were used to teenagers often disappearing, being able to stay with friends for several days, but usually returning. However, the girl's mother felt that something was wrong because her daughter was not getting in touch at all, which caused alarm. Unlike typical cases, law enforcement officials didn't wait for news from the missing girl and immediately began searching. Investigators wondered if the girl could have simply run away. According to her loved ones, there had indeed been some changes in her behavior over the past few months, which are traditionally difficult for teenagers. Justice's family had moved to the small town of Sorrento, Florida, with a population of less than 1,000 people. It has a warm, mild climate and picturesque nature. The girl changed schools, and considering that she was a high school student in the middle of the school year, this could indeed create certain difficulties. In such situations, typical teenagers often lose control, run away to friends, going through difficult times. Justice could have also stayed with friends for the weekend after classes on Friday. However, the girl's mother denied any such assumptions. Justice was mature, responsible, helped her with her younger daughter, and could not just disappear without warning. Sometimes it seemed that she was even too mature for her young age. There was no reason to run away from loved ones or problems, because she was used to facing them head-on, and she always discussed difficulties with her mother. Besides, all her things remained at home. Danelle insisted that some misfortune could have happened to her daughter, and it was necessary to start searching immediately. Despite the assurances of law enforcement officers, Danelle was getting more and more worried. Her daughter had never kept bad company. Attempts to run away or avoid problems were uncharacteristic of her. Even if she had stayed with friends, she would definitely have called her parents and let them know. However, the missing girl remained silent, ignoring any calls and messages, including on social networks. The girl was friendly and sociable, did not use prohibited substances or alcohol. To assume that she decided to leave without warning anyone was simply absurd. The police checked the database for the missing teenager and confirmed the mother's words, she really did not appear in the criminal reports. Justice had also not been involved in any accidents. Law enforcement officers began searching for the girl, talking to all her friends, interviewing dozens of teenagers, classmates, and companions. Because of this, many rumors spread on social networks. Schoolchildren retold Justice's story in different ways. Some claimed that they saw her sleeping on the graves of the cemetery, others, that she had moved to her secret boyfriend. Most of this information was fictitious. Young men and girls made up the most incredible lies for selfish reasons, just to gain more popularity at school and attract attention to themselves. In fact, she did not have a boyfriend, and she never had a habit of wandering around the cemetery before. Another part of the teenagers who sincerely loved and valued the missing girl began to counter the spreaders of rumors. They exposed these speculations and repeatedly attacked the most ardent gossipmongers. Because of this, one of the girls was even suspended from classes for the period of the investigation at school. The rumors of Raisa Shedchev not only outraged the parents of the children but also the entire town. The public was indignant and tried to help in the search, but to no avail. Despite the obstacles, law enforcement officers managed to narrow down the circle of suspects and persons closest to the missing girl to a reasonable number. It included the girl's closest school friends, who were interrogated first. The police hoped in this way to find the young beauty safe and sound. However, what they found out not only radically changed the direction of their work but also allowed them to track down one of the most bloodthirsty villains that experienced detectives had ever encountered. Law enforcement officers spoke with all the girl's acquaintances, as well as interviewed teachers and classmates. Investigators established that she never showed up at school that Friday morning, that is, she disappeared in the morning. A check of video surveillance recordings along Justice's route and the geolocation of her phone showed that she did indeed leave the house around 7:25 a.m. and set off for school. But the girl disappeared approximately within a half-hour interval on the way to the educational institution. What happened to Justice on the way? For days after the disappearance of young Justice, on April 17, a man turned to the police department. While doing his morning jog, he noticed an unpleasant odor coming from the side of the trail. Intrigued, he turned towards the forest. Having walked only a few meters, the athlete came across a human body. The man did not touch anything or trample the traces at the crime scene but immediately called the 911 emergency service. Police officers arrived at the scene of the gruesome discovery and found a female body with signs of severe decomposition. The slight participation of animals and the hot, humid weather was noticeable. The main mass of damaged tissues was formed as a result of the influence of some chemical substance. Forensic experts found out that it was something like bleach, which was poured over the victim's body, obviously to hide traces and evidence. It was not possible to identify the deceased at the crime scene. Laboratory analysis was needed for this. However, the investigators assumed that this was the missing Justice they had been so persistently searching for. The entire upper part of the body was disfigured by chemical burns. Even in this state, it was obvious that the girl did not die of natural causes. The police were able to confirm that they had Justice in front of them only after DNA analysis. Her final resting place was a wooded area near the town of Deland, located about half an hour's drive from Sorrento, where she lived. The upper part of the body was so severely decomposed that the bones were exposed. The lower half was partially preserved thanks to the pants and shoes. In addition, there was possibly less chemical substance here, so the skin was not so badly burned. Due to the poor condition of the body, the exact cause of Justice's death could not be established, but strangulation seemed most likely. The attacker pulled the girl's pants down to her ankles and pulled her t-shirt up to her back, suggesting violence. Unfortunately, the bleach destroyed most of the traces, so this motive could not be proven. It was obvious that the victim had received several strong blows to the face, as her nose was broken in several places. The police interrogated the jogger who discovered the gruesome find and called 911. He was able to provide valuable information. According to the man, when he was running near the body on the trail back on the 16th, he noticed another person in that place from afar. According to the witness, it was a man, but he could not say more, because the noise of the approaching athlete startled the criminal, and he fled. The jogger found the stranger's reaction strange, so he remembered this incident, but that day he did not approach closer and did not see the body, doing it only the next day. The jogger himself turned out to be uninvolved in what happened, which was also verified by the investigation. He successfully passed a polygraph test and had an alibi for the day of Justice's disappearance. To obtain new information, the detectives carefully studied the video surveillance recordings along Justice's entire route, including at the nearest stop where the teenager was supposed to get on the bus. According to the girl's mother, she went to school on her own, but soon the police found out that this was a lie. In fact, that morning, Justice's stepfather, Robert, agreed to drive the schoolgirl to the educational institution. He was just about to go to work, where he moonlighted as a carpenter, and was driving a work car. Recently, the man had problems with work, he could not get a permanent position. The detectives could not understand why the mother had lied about how her daughter had gotten to school. Therefore, the investigators decided to talk to the victim's mother more thoroughly. This time she changed her version and confirmed that her daughter had not gone alone. Robert had agreed to take Justice to school in his car. The woman explained her lie by the fact that Robert's driver's license had been suspended. She was afraid that he would be punished if she immediately told the police the truth. This happened at a time when everyone was still hoping to find the girl alive and unharmed. The woman was sure that her little lie would not interfere with the search for her daughter in any way. Unfortunately, there were a lot of such deceptions in this case, so the investigation had to make a lot of efforts to restore the true picture of events. After that, the detectives requested the school's video surveillance recordings directed at the parking lot. This is where the stepfather with Justice should have stopped if he really drove the teenager to school. The bus that brought the children to school and which the girl was late for also stopped at this place. Oddly enough, just at the time interval when the main figures of this investigation were supposed to get into the camera's lenses, a malfunction occurred. The recording was not conducted. Therefore, it was impossible to determine whether the stepfather had dropped off Justice. However, dozens of witnesses claimed that the girl never showed up at school that day, no one saw her, so there were doubts whether the stepfather had come to school at all. In any case, the last person to see the murdered girl alive was Robert, the lover of Justice's mother. And only he could know what happened. Law enforcement officers called Robert in for questioning but did not put any pressure on him. Eventually, he began to talk. On April 29, the man admitted that he had not taken Justice to school after all. Instead, at her own request, he gave the girl a ride to a neighboring town and dropped her off at the entrance so that she could meet with some friend of hers. According to Robert, his stepdaughter begged him to do this. He assumed that it was her secret boyfriend, whom she had not told anyone about, not even her mother. So the man gave in to the girl's persuasion in order to improve relations with her and gain her trust. According to the stepfather, he did not ask Justice for details, since he had only recently started dating her mother and wanted to please the teenager in order to be able to continue this relationship. However, Robert did not know either the name or any details about the friend she was supposed to meet. The stepdaughter assured him that she would get to school on her own and planned to return by bus. Therefore, he was not worried about her. The man himself could not wait for the girl, because he had to go to his shift as a handyman in Volusia County. He simply did not have time for this. This turn of events stunned the police. Neither of the parents had any idea about this mysterious stranger Justice was allegedly dating. It was quite possible that he was the last one to see the girl alive, or even somehow involved in what happened to her. However, neither the mother nor the stepfather could provide any valuable information on this matter. Then the detectives questioned the victim's friends again, and this helped them to come up with the first significant leads. Justice's closest girlfriends claimed that she did not have a boyfriend. However, they recalled that quite recently, the girl had started talking about some young man from the internet. She met him on social networks, and he actively showed interest in her, he wrote often, which Justice shared with her friends. However, the girl herself did not like the intrusiveness of this guy. Her friends doubted that she would go on a date with him. Investigators thoroughly checked the victim's social media pages. They analyzed the likes, comments, her new subscriptions, and correspondence. One profile particularly caught the attention of the detectives. For the last few months, an 18-year-old young man, whose avatar featured a muscular guy, had been actively communicating with Justice and constantly interacting with her posts. He openly flirted with the girl, suggested meeting, and showered her with compliments. Despite the fact that the stranger claimed to live nearby, the police could not find anyone resembling the photo among the victim's closest circle. None of Justice's friends recognized this young man either. Moreover, despite his persistent attempts to get acquainted, the girl never responded to his messages, she simply ignored them. Nevertheless, law enforcement officers were convinced that it was this social media profile that was the key to solving the crime. The detectives studied the page of the intrusive young man and the information from his account in detail. They managed to find out the phone number associated with the profile. It turned out that in reality, it did not belong to an 18-year-old boy at all, but to a middle-aged man named Robert Kern. It was none other than Justice's stepfather. The investigators were shocked, because during the first interrogation, this man had already aroused their distrust. They turned to Robert again, who had previously been so willing to cooperate. But now his position had changed dramatically, he refused to communicate with the police. However, law enforcement officers did not back down. Robert had already been caught in a lie, and now all the clues were pointing to him. He became the main suspect in the case of the murder of his underage stepdaughter. Despite his resistance, the police arrested Kern and thoroughly investigated his personality to understand if he could have committed this brutal crime. Of course, correspondence on social networks alone was not enough to accuse a person of murder. Moreover, by that time, Robert had almost become a member of the family, since he had been dating the victim's mother since last fall. He often stayed overnight at their place and had close contact with all the household members. At least until that moment, the investigation had no evidence of the stepfather's improper behavior towards the girl. And Justice herself did not tell anyone about this. During the interrogation, Robert denied his guilt in any harassment of his stepdaughter. He justified the correspondence on social networks as a failed joke, allegedly wanting to increase the girl's self-esteem in this way, who would be pleased to receive so much male attention. But this version sounded absolutely absurd. After all, Justice did not even respond to the young man who actively liked her photos and showered her with compliments, she simply ignored him and called him weird in conversations with her friends. To find evidence against the stepfather, the detectives decided to talk to the victim's best friend named Rachel. The girl said that recently she and Justice had become very close and often stayed overnight at each other's place. During one of these visits, Robert came to pick up his stepdaughter to take her home. He asked Rachel if everything was all right with Justice and when she was going to return, but this visit frightened the girl even more. After that, she did not go home but stayed the night with her friend. According to Rachel, for several months before the tragedy, Justice had been staying overnight at her place so often that it began to seem suspicious. It seemed that the girl was deliberately avoiding staying overnight in her own home. In recent months, the stepfather had been staying at their house somehow too often, perhaps it was his presence that so frightened the victim. Rachel recalled that a month before her death, her friend had spent almost all her time living with her. The girl also noted that Justice had become somewhat nervous. If earlier she was calm, now she shuddered at the slightest accidental touch. And she even hinted that she was afraid of her stepfather. During the interrogation, the best friend remembered that on the day of Justice's disappearance, she saw Robert. According to her, he looked creepy, had a terrible look, so frightening that Rachel involuntarily thought that she understood why Justice stayed overnight with her so often. True, the girl could not clearly formulate what exactly seemed so suspicious or scary to her in the stepfather's behavior. Despite the lack of a clear wording, the investigators realized that they were moving in the right direction. The detectives decided to delve deeper into the biography of the main suspect. They analyzed his dialogues on social networks and calls from his mobile phone. What law enforcement officers discovered caused them outright disgust. It turned out that Robert had a rich criminal experience, starting with 2 burglaries in the early 2000s. According to the history of his search queries over the past month, they managed to come across capable of depriving a person of consciousness, in particular. He even tried to purchase this tool, apparently, successfully. In addition, the criminal had been studying maps of the surrounding forests for a long time, obviously looking for the ideal place to hide the body. He was also interested in ways to destroy traces on the body, having learned about the bleach that was used to treat the victim's body. The detectives checked the geolocation data of the criminal's mobile phone on the day the girl disappeared. It turned out that he was not driving her to the bus stop, or to school, or dropping her off in the city to meet an unknown young man. In fact, the stepfather purposefully went to the forest, where the body of young Justice was later found. In this place, the mobile phone remained stationary for a long time. According to law enforcement officials, for about an hour. At first, Robert claimed that he was heading to work in Volusia County, but this was an outright lie. In fact, he brought his mistress's daughter to the forest, where he probably attacked her, killed her, and then engaged in concealing evidence. The collected evidence allowed for charges to be brought in the murder of underage Justice. Robert was kept in custody until the start of the trial. The exact motive of the criminal remained unclear. He did not voice it until the very end of the case, but the prosecution believed that it was a murder for the purpose of. Robert refused to testify in his own defense in court but never pleaded guilty. However, the prosecutors had enough evidence to accuse the man of committing this cruel crime. The defendant's tumultuous criminal past was announced at the court hearing. Robert was first arrested back in May 2001 in the state of New York on charges of fraud. Since then, he had been held in the Volusia County Jail without the right to bail. It was proven that in 1999, the man first violated the law by committing burglary, for which he received 18 months in prison. And just 3 years later, he committed another theft, for which he served a whole year. All the criminal's testimony turned out to be lies. He claimed that he had dropped Justice off at school early in the morning and also said that he worked as a carpenter. However, both statements were refuted. When the deception was revealed, Robert began to invent other excuses, but all this also turned out to be a complete lie designed to confuse the investigators. The detectives were able to accurately track the movements of the criminal and his victim, comparing all the time intervals. The data from his mobile phones and correspondence allowed them to conclude that he had been preparing for this crime for a long time. The prosecution believed that the girl had no chance of survival from the very beginning, since Robert desired her death. Particles of vegetation and soil characteristic of the place where the body was found were discovered in the criminal's car. This was despite his assurances that he had never been to that area. In fact, the man had visited there at least twice. Already after committing the brutal crime, he returned to the murder scene once more. At least his phone was recorded in that area for a short time on April 16th. It was probably then that Robert arrived and doused the body with a chemical to cover his tracks. And at that moment, it seems, he was seen by the same jogger who later found the body. At the time of the crime, the defendant was 43 years old. The prosecution tried to prove that his attack was in nature. He purposefully kidnapped the teenager to rape her and brutally deal with her. The defendant had long had a lustful attraction to Justice, but she avoided him in every possible way, rarely appearing at home. Robert did not stop trying to take advantage of her, and one day he waited for the right occasion. He achieved his insidious intent by vilely taking the life of 16-year-old Justice. The girl's mother, shocked by the murder of her daughter by her cohabitant, testified against him. She claimed that it was Robert who dissuaded her from calling the police immediately after Justice's disappearance, convincing her that she was simply staying overnight with her friend Rachel. Then he asked her to lie, allegedly that the girl had gone to school on her own. At first, the woman did not understand the motives for this request. She thought that he was simply afraid of the consequences of driving without a license. After discussing the case materials, the jury reached a verdict in literally half an hour. In their opinion, Robert Kern was guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of a minor. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to early release. In addition, the criminal received an additional 5 years in prison for trying to confuse the investigation. Throughout the entire process, he never pleaded guilty, showed no remorse for what he had done. Despite the obvious evidence, until the very last moment, he insisted on his innocence and accused the authorities of arbitrariness. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.